up, movie crew? I have been promising this video for a while, and it is finally here. My complete Marvel Cinematic Universe collection. Before I get started, if you are new to this channel, my name is Luke, this is Let's Watch a Movie, and if you're in anything cinema and physical media related, you've come to the right place, so hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 1K, and at 1,000 subscribers, there will be a 5 Steelbook giveaway. Alright, so I mentioned that when I got my copy of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, that I would be doing a complete MCU collection video. I'll have the pinned comment down below where you can see my Wakanda Forever unboxing video where I explain why this video got delayed. But without further ado, I'm going to have this broken up into different phases, and I'm going to have another segment in the video for some of the stuff that wasn't necessarily made by Marvel Studios, but does have a direct connection to the MCU. I also want to point out that everything here are official releases. We'll just keep that part there. But without further ado, let's get started with Phase 1. Alright, so the MCU began in May of 2008 with Iron Man. Alright, so I have mentioned in my top 5 MCU movies that I initially was not sure about wanting to see this movie, and it's in the top 5. I don't really need to say anything else. The pinned comment down below will have my top 5 MCU movies as well, so be sure to check that out. And unlike my DC stuff, I don't fully double dip on some of the Marvel stuff like I do DC for a couple different reasons, but this is one where I had to because this has more bonus features than the 4K Steelbook. 4K Steelbook just has the 4K and the Blu-ray. The Blu-ray I just showed off has the movie and a second disc full of bonus features. And I gotta say, I liked it with the MCU 4K Steelbooks. I don't own them all, but the ones I do own, they have the original movie posters. This is just, I really like this cover. And then on the back, you've got the arc reactor that Tony was using in the first movie. Alright, I am not going to tell you that this is one of my favorite movies because it is not. But the second movie is The Incredible Hulk. And while it's not a great movie, there's some stuff in it. I have been able to rewatch it, unlike other movies that I've seen in the past. And yeah, that's pretty much it. After seeing Iron Man 2, I was excited for what they were going to do for Iron Man. I was excited for Iron Man 2. I know this movie gets a lot of hate, but I've got to say, this is not lower tier for me. If you've seen my bottom 5 MCU video, then you already know this was not in there. Part of the reason being, I felt like the progression of Tony's story made sense. We get to see more of Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury. We get the introduction of Black Widow. And in a controversial thing, we did get a recasting where Terrence Howard played Rhodey in the first movie. We now have Don Cheadle. And this was a good way for us to see him as Rhodey. And in this movie, we got to see him as War Machine. So, yes, this movie is not great. It is definitely not going to be top tier for me, but it is definitely not bottom tier because it does a lot of things very well. It's just not the best movie. Next, and probably the one movie I still need to upgrade to 4K, and that is Thor. I didn't mind this movie, and this is actually one of the few movies that I was able to watch in 3D. Long story short, I can't do 3D for a couple different reasons. But this movie looked good. It didn't look like a cluster when you're watching it on the big screen. And this was also my introduction to Chris Hemsworth as an actor, and seeing him in this role was good. It made me interested in checking out more stuff from him. The supporting cast does a great job in this movie. I've got to say, while the first Thor movie is not a great movie, this movie's probably, up until, throughout phase 1 at least, I think this movie's got the best supporting cast. You've got Natalie Portman playing Jane. You've got Tom Hiddleston playing Loki, something that ends up becoming a staple for the MCU. Anthony Hopkins doing his thing as Odin. And then you got Heimdall played by Idris Elba. I don't know about anyone else, but for something that's still trying to get its feet off the ground, that's a pretty stacked cast. Next, we have Captain America, the First Avenger. Alright, Chris Evans did his thing. Sebastian Stan did his thing. I can't say I'm a huge fan of this movie, though. We're still seeing Haley Atwell get used to playing Peggy Carter. I feel like Tommy Lee Jones was just phoning in his performance. And while we got a decent performance from Hugo Weaving as Red Skull, he pretty much straight up told everyone before the first movie that he won't coming back. And that kind of took a little bit of viewing this movie away from me. But rewatching it and having watched it more than once, thoughts are still the same, unfortunately. When the MCU was first formed, they said the long-term plan was because they had the rights to the main characters, we would eventually get the Avengers. I want to point out that this movie is still great. It missed out my top 5 by that much. It's definitely a top 10 for me, I will say that. This is the Target exclusive where it comes with a bonus disc, which is a 90-minute documentary of assembling the Avengers. So there is the original Blu-ray release I got, which I believe this was also the first MCU movie that was released by Disney, because the original deal with Paramount was made before Disney bought Marvel. And of course, we got the 4K Steelbook as well. And then on the back, we've got the Tesseract. Now, personally, Iron Man and the first Avengers are probably my 2 favorite films from Phase 1. I think both of those did really good. With Avengers, we got the culmination of 4 years of movies, plus a little tease of what was to come with the Thanos cameo. So that is everything for Phase 1. Let's get into Phase. Alright, so this next section is Phase 2. In 2012, we only got one MCU movie with Avengers. In 2013, we began Phase 2 with Iron Man 3. I was very hyped for this movie because we were finally getting Mandarin. If you've seen the trailers, then it looked like we were going to be getting the Extremis storyline, which is a storyline from the comics that I actually enjoyed. And this movie's a letdown. I don't know what else to say. We got It was sad to see that this was kind of the end of the Iron Man trilogy, because as good as Robert Downey Jr. was in the role, this was not a good way to finish off his trilogy. I don't know what else to say on that one. That was in May of 2013, I believe. In November, we got Thor: The Dark World. This movie gets a lot of hate. And my thoughts for this movie are pretty much the same as Iron Man 2. It is not a great movie, but it wasn't the worst thing I've seen either. We get to see a reluctant alliance between Thor and Loki. We see the introduction of Malekith. Given what we had just gotten the year before with Avengers, the stakes felt a little high, and then it was just, this movie could have been a lot better. Now, I will say, I do think it's better than some people say. I know a lot of people that would call The Dark World the worst MCU movie to date. I am not one of those people. So I'm just going to say that part now. Next, we got Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Alright, as I mentioned with First Avenger, I was not that hyped for this movie. I wasn't the biggest fan of the first one. And if you've read the comics, then you already know who the Winter Soldier is. And they were kind of trying to play off this mystery thing. And it's like, well, you already know who it is. However, I was wrong. This is in my top 5 of MCU movies. They did a good job on changing up the genre from being First Avenger being a World War II type movie to this being a political thriller. It made sense. This is one of the reasons you don't see a lot of S.H.I.E.L.D. moving forward. You get to see Scarlett Johansson come back as Black Widow. You get the introduction of Falcon. And all of it made sense with the characters you see in this movie. Definitely one to check out if you have not seen other movies in the MCU. Also, in 2014, we got one of the weirdest announcements from Marvel that one of the Phase 2 movies would be none other than Guardians of the Galaxy. And yes, another movie I need to upgrade to 4K. Alright, when this movie was first announced, they said that James Gunn was directing. I was like, alright, cool. Slither and Super are both great movies. Then they announced that Vin Diesel and Bradley Cooper, the two people that have done action movies before, are going to be Groot and Rocket, while Chris Pratt, the guy from television, mainly sitcom stuff, was going to be Star-Lord. And that confused me. I'm like, why would they do that? I was wrong. This movie is pretty good. And I've got to say, they did a solid job with this one, getting the group together, because this one starts out no one really knows each other. You get them all banded together. They take on the villain in this. Who could have been a better villain? And this is also another movie where we get to see Thanos. This is probably the first one where we really get to see him since the tease in the first Avengers movie. And right after Guardians of the Galaxy, we got the culmination of what ended up being Avengers: Age of Ultron. And this movie was a letdown for me. If you've ever seen the honest trailers, they got it right with this one. with all the stakes that are so high in all the other movies leading up to this one, the Avengers don't assemble. But when someone might be up to something, the Avengers assembled. There was also the controversy about the fact that Quicksilver, who is both an Avenger and an X-Men, there was a little bit of a rights issue because Joss Whedon and Bryan Singer wanted to use Quicksilver in future movies. And you would think with this movie being the one more people were hyped for because the X-Men movies have been kind of hit or miss, that we would have gotten the better Quicksilver in this movie, and that was not the case. Personally, to me, this one just feels like a very long trailer and recap. Like, hey, here's what everyone was up to right before this movie, and here's all the stuff that's coming up. Thanks for watching. And to top it all off, in addition to feeling a little let down, I saw this movie in IMAX, of all things, too. I gotta say, personally, I was a little let down. Where Avengers was the end of Phase 1, Age of Ultron was not the ending for Phase 2. We still had Antman. Now, when they first announced this, I was like, alright, cool. Hank Pym's pretty cool when it goes to seeing him in the Avengers. And then they announced Paul Rudd was playing Ant-Man. And my first thought was, I don't know if I'd want him playing Hank Pym, but I personally wouldn't mind him playing Scott Lang, the second Ant-Man. And when they announced that Michael Douglas was playing Hank Pym, I'm like, alright, you got my curiosity here. I was a little surprised with what they did with Yellow Jacket in this movie. I think they could have done a little bit more with him, which they kind of did. I'm not going to spoil that one for anyone that hasn't seen the most recent movie. But overall, this is actually one of my favorite MCU movies. The humor felt different from previous MCU outings. Paul Rudd did his thing as Scott Lang, and we also have something we hadn't really seen in the other movies, which is Scott Lang being a father. Don't really see any of the other Avengers going, oh yeah, that's my kid. In Scott's case, one of the biggest things that his biggest motive on everything is making sure that his daughter is taken care of. So this is the Steelbook that came out, I want to say in 2016 or 2017. And then when Disney finally got off their lazy asses and made 4K releases, here is the 4K Steelbook. And that is everything from Phase 2. Alright, so before I get into Phase 3, there were a couple of things that came out through either Marvel Television or, in one case, Fox. And I want to include these because there are connections with what I'm about to show to the greater MCU. And the first thing I am showing off is Agent Carter Season 1. Now, unlike some of the other TV shows that came out at the time, this one actually had Kevin Feige's involvement, and we have seen Haley Atwell come back a couple of times to reprise the role of Agent Carter in the MCU, and we do have a cameo in Endgame from one of the characters in Agent Carter. Now, I know a lot of people that personally enjoyed this TV show. I'm not one of them. It wasn't bad, it wasn't great, it was, for me, it was just kind of there. But It is one of the MCU things, and I got the UK Steelbook. So there is season 1. And despite its low ratings, it did end up getting a renewal for a season 2. Unfortunately, around this time, that was when Haley Atwell signed up for another show, and it got canceled after season 2. But again, I am including this one because there are further connections between this show and the MCU. So there is that one. And I think it was either 2012 or 2013, Marvel made a deal with Netflix, which was 4 shows that would lead to the culmination of their own crossover with the Defenders. And the first thing we got out of that was Daredevil. Me personally, when it goes to Marvel's television shows, Daredevil is hands down my favorite. This is the one where I am glad they are absolutely bringing this one back with Daredevil Born Again. This was one where I actually had to sign up for Netflix because I needed to see this show. Charlie Cox did great as Matt Murdoch. Vincent D'Onofrio did great as Kingpin, aka Wilson Fisk. This show just had a lot going for it. Reason I'm including this one, again, we've got Daredevil Born Again, but we have seen Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio reprise their roles in the MCU. Charlie Cox showed back up as Matt Murdoch, both in Spider-Man No Way Home and She-Hulk. Vincent D'Onofrio showed up in Hawkeye. And given the connections of those shows, right after Daredevil Season 1, we got Jessica Jones Season 1. I personally like this season. Season 1 is good. This is the only one to get a physical release, sadly, as far as her show goes. I enjoyed it. Season 2 and 3 both could have been better. But Season 1 I thought was great. Kristen Ritter definitely did her thing as the lead. I had not really seen her play a character like this before, so I was a little hesitant. But once we got to see her in action, it was great. The following year, we got Daredevil Season 2. While this one's not as good as Season 1, they did do some world building where they introduced Elektra, played by Elodie Young, and we got John Bernthal playing Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. Marvel, if you're watching this, bring back John Bernthal as the Punisher. He was phenomenal in that role. Now, again, Season 2 is not as good as Season 1, but again, Season 1 is like S-tier ranking for a superhero TV show. I stand behind that, so to anyone that disagrees, come at me. I am not backing down. So Season 2 had a lot to build up to. So I give it some slack that it wasn't quite Season 1. Unfortunately, Season 3 came out around the time that we knew that Netflix and Marvel were ending their partnership, so there is no physical release for Season 3. So there is that. And the last of the Netflix shows that I own is Luke Cage Season 1. No, I do not own Iron Fist. I have no intentions of owning Iron Fist. That's that. Luke Cage Season 1, I liked that we got 2 different villains across the season. It was good. It definitely could have been a little bit better, but it was still enjoyable. And unlike the other steelbooks that I've got, this one actually does have a little bit of disc artwork on the back. And for those that have not seen the announcements, Deadpool is coming to the MCU with Deadpool 3. Therefore, I do need to show off the first Deadpool. where we see Ryan Reynolds play a more comic book accurate version of the character after we got the crap that was X-Men Origins Wolverine. This movie, while flawed, is still very enjoyable. I recently watched it for Valentine's Day. If anyone has not seen this movie, Deadpool is a love story. And Deadpool 2 is a family story. Now, to my knowledge, I do believe we are seeing Zazie Beetz come back as Domino. I don't know if we're going to see Cable come back. Big reason there being that Cable is also played by the same actor that played Thanos. But we are getting Deadpool 3 soon. I am looking forward to that. This movie is still good. It's not quite as good as the first Deadpool movie, but it is still enjoyable. And I'm curious to see how Marvel handles their first rated R movie. They have confirmed that not too long ago, Deadpool 3 is going to be not only rated R, but the MCU's first rated R movie. I'm going to be honest, I was being a little lazy. I do have Once Upon a Deadpool, but it is currently in storage, and I felt a little too lazy to go over there and grab it. So, I also have that. Alright, now let's get... Alright, Phase 3 began with Captain America Civil War. Alright, I'm aware that this movie made $1 billion. I'm aware that a lot of people would probably say that this is their favorite Captain America movie. I am not one of those people. Yes, it's not a bad movie. However, Civil War has a lot going on in the comic. And I get, yeah, they couldn't use the X-Men. But there was a lot of other characters they could have used and didn't. And this is not quite as good as what we got in the comics. And also, this is a Captain America movie, and I was kind of understanding Iron Man's side a little bit more. That's just my personal opinion. Next up, we got Doctor Strange. I have already given my thoughts on this movie. I got a pinned comment down below for where this movie currently lands on my MCU ranking. I do want to say, that aside, Benedict Cumberbatch is great as the titular character. He does a great job in the role, but the movie, for me personally, was not great. In 2017, we got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This one I saw in IMAX, and I've got to say the special effects look pretty cool in IMAX. This is where we got the introduction of Mantis. This is where Star-Lord gets to meet his father, played by Kurt Russell of all people too, and we got David Hasselhoff in the movie as well. Personally, this one, as far as some of the sequels go, this was a better sequel than some of the other ones we've gotten. And there were stakes in this movie. If you've seen it, you already know what I'm talking about. And I ended up getting the standard Blu-ray for this one. This was actually, I believe, the first Disney release to get a 4K. But I forget what the reason was, but I ended up getting the standard Blu-ray steelbook for myself. And then later on with the Disney Insider Rewards thing, I redeemed my points for the 4K. If you saw Captain America Civil War, we got the introduction of the MCU Spider-Man. Now, I did have the standalone release for Homecoming, but with all the re-releases that Sony has done, in place of that, I am showing off my 4-movie steelbook that's got the first 2 MCU Spider-Man movies, Venom, and Into the Spider-Verse. So, Homecoming. I know a lot of people liked it. It was like, yes, we're finally getting Spider-Man in the MCU. We've got a nice little appearance from Iron Man in there. Homecoming has some plot holes, y'all. Certain movies take place in real time, and they screwed up the intro to Homecoming. And there's a little bit of a plot hole there, and it kind of stuck with me throughout the entire movie. Far From Home I will get to once we get to Far From Home's point in the MCU. "2017 was the first year that we got 3 MCU movies in a calendar year, with the third one being Ragnarok. Alright. I will agree with a lot of people that this is probably the best Thor movie to date. And yes, I will even say it's better than Love and Thunder. However, I feel like they overdid it with some of the comedy. Like, there are some plot points that I think would have stuck better had they not followed it up with a joke. Does that mean this movie's bad? No. Taika Waititi did a great job making this movie, and I think he's getting a little too much hate for Love and Thunder. But that ain't the point. The point is, we got Ragnarok at the end of 2017. And overall, the first really good Thor movie. Right before we get to Infinity War, we get Black Panther. Alright, so this is another one where I double dip because my local Best Buy was already sold out of the 4K Steelbook, so I got the Blu-ray Steelbook. So there's the front, and there's the back. Alright, with Black Panther, I had mixed feelings before seeing this. Chadwick Boseman did a great job in Civil War. This movie has a great director in Ryan Coogler and one of the most stacked casts. However, being someone that actually reads the comics, some of Black Panther's solo stuff is not some of my favorite stuff. Like, it's alright. I like when they used him in Avengers, and one of the things I liked about his solo run, they could not do in the movie. For those that have not seen, don't read the comics. In the comics, he's married to Storm from the X-Men, who they couldn't use at the time. But overall, this movie was great. It is in my top 5 of MCU movies. They did a great job. It is a shame that this is the only solo Black Panther movie we get with Chadwick Boseman. R.I.P. to Chadwick Boseman. And because they did not have the 4K Steelbook, I did eventually get the standard 4K release. I gotta say, this movie does look pretty good in 4K. The culmination of what everyone was looking forward to, and that is Avengers Infinity War. This is where we see Thanos take on the Avengers. We get the union of the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy. And this movie has a huge first for the MCU. And that is that at the end of the movie, the Avengers have lost. Now, I know a lot of people will put this as their favorite MCU movie. And I know a lot of people that will say that if it's not their favorite MCU movie, this is probably their favorite Avengers movie. I am not one of those people. I'm not saying it's bad. I love the movie. It's really good. It definitely, if you've seen my reviews, you know I complain about runtimes all the time. This movie earned its lengthy runtime. I'm probably going to be doing a video soon explaining why I prefer Endgame over Infinity War. In 2018, we get Antman and the Wasp. The events of what happened in here are happening concurrently with Infinity War. This explains why we don't get Scott Lang in Infinity War. Overall, I enjoyed this movie, and the ending explains why we only get Scott Lang in Endgame at first. I enjoy this movie. It is definitely good. It does get a little repetitive, but overall, I think it's a good movie. And I went with the 4K, the standard 4K over the Steelbook because I like this lenticular cover. Now, not too long ago, I did eventually get an Ant-Man and the Wasp Steelbook. They had this at, I don't think I got it at my local FYE, but I did get it at FYE for, I want to say $20. So for an import, that's not a bad price. At the end of Infinity War, before Nick Fury gets dusted, he makes a call of sorts, and that call is to none other than Captain Marvel. Alright. So, as I have found out after doing my bottom 5 MCU movie, a lot of people don't like this movie. I'm actually not one of those people. I enjoyed this one. I thought it did a good job of introducing Captain Marvel. I like the fact that it took place in the 90s for the most part, so it was kind of cool seeing her land in a blockbuster. You get to see Clark Gregg come back as Coulson. You get to see a younger Nick Fury. I will say this movie does explain why Nick Fury wears an eye patch, and I thought it was stupid on what they did. But overall, I enjoyed this movie, and I'm looking forward to the Marvels when it comes out in November. And we're almost towards the end of Phase 3, but not quite. And that is Avengers Endgame. Alright. So, I went into this movie a little skeptical for a couple of reasons. One, while I do think that Infinity War and Endgame earned their lengthy runtimes, this one's over 3 hours long. I asked a day off from work to go see this movie. So, it had to meet a specific level of expectations for me, and it did. I was concerned on this one for a couple of different reasons, and I ended up being wrong in the end, and I am glad I was wrong. This is my favorite Avengers movie. It did a great job setting the stakes up for certain people. And it also teases what's to come without necessarily taking away from the movie. This had a lot to do, and it managed to do everything, in my opinion, perfectly. If anyone has ever seen pitch meetings, I will have this in the pinned comment as well, where a lot of people were wondering, why are we getting a Spider-Man movie right after Endgame? And Ryan George said, well, while Endgame is that meal, here's your after dinner mint. And that is Spider-Man Far From Home. I got one of the limited slipcovers from Walmart. So, Far From Home, we get Mysterio. We get Spider-Man after the events of Endgame, trying to figure out how to do some of this stuff on his own, and he thinks he's met someone he can trust, and it turns out maybe not. We get a decent villain in the Elementals and Mysterio. And while I had my issues with Homecoming, Far From Home was definitely a step in the right direction. Now I know we'll get to the next one in a minute. A lot of people at one point were even saying that Far From Home was their favorite live-action Spider-Man movie. I'm not going to go that far. I still, at the time, thought Spider-Man 2 was better than Far From Home, but it was still a step in the right direction with the direction they were going with Spider-Man. And that is my Phase 3 collection. Next up. Alright, so we are now at Phase 4 of the MCU. Phase 3 was the end of the Infinity Saga. Phase 4 is the beginning of the Multiverse Saga. Now, before I get into this one, I do want to tell everyone this is only the movies. The TV shows have not gotten official release dates from Marvel or Disney and are pretty much only on Disney+. So I guess there's a plug for Disney Plus for anyone that wants to check out all of the shows. So the first movie in Phase 4 is Black Widow. And I'm going to be honest with everyone, I was let down. This movie, they did Scarlett Johansson wrong in this. She should have gotten her own movie a lot sooner. I will say Florence Pugh and David Harbour do their thing in their roles, and I'm looking forward to seeing them in the Thunderbolts, which I think is coming next year. I got to double check that release date. But for the most part, this movie was a letdown for a lot of different reasons. The fact this is the only Black Widow-led movie we're getting is not great. We get a typical throwaway villain. Other than building up for the Thunderbolts, that's pretty much the only good thing about this movie. Next, we get Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. For anyone that is wondering, this is the Target Digibook edition. And there is the standard 4K for anyone that wants to check it out. While this movie could have been better, this is definitely one of the better movies in Phase 4. It's got unique fighting. It's got a different story from some of the other ones. And in a strange twist of events, we actually have some cameos. I'm not going to say I'm the biggest Shang-Chi fan, but if you've read any of the comics, other than a couple of connections that him and Iron Man have to the Mandarin, there's really not a lot of connections there between him and other characters in the Marvel Universe. So the fact that we got some pretty cool cameos made the movie a little bit more fun. Gotta say, love it. Looking forward to seeing what Simu Liu does, not only as Shang-Chi, but seeing what else he does in some of his future movies. He proved that he is leading man material with this. Alright, so because of what happened in 2020, a lot of things got pushed back, so we got a lot of movies in 2021. The next one being The Eternals. I'm going ahead and spoil it for those that have not yet seen my bottom 5 MCU movies. A lot of people will say that Thor: The Dark World or The Incredible Hulk are the worst movies in the MCU. For me, it's this one. I had to watch it in 2 sittings, and I've only watched it the one time. Between the runtime, the characters coming across as unlikable, I am not a fan of this movie, and I'm very not wanting to see these characters show up again. For those that were complaining about there not being a lot of connective tissue between this and the overall MCU, the Eternals are very much kind of standalone-ish in the Marvel Universe and the comics, so that part made sense to me. But the characters coming across as unlikable, I wasn't down with that. But Marvel went from releasing what is one of my least favorite movies to one of my favorite movies with Spider-Man No Way Home. So I got the Target slipcover edition because, oddly enough, this was the cheapest version out there. Like, this exclusive 4K was the same price as the Blu-ray. So not only do we get what is my favorite movie in Phase 4, this is probably my favorite live-action Spider-Man movie. After the events of Far From Home, people now know that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are one and the same, and Peter decides to use his Avengers connections and asks Doctor Strange to cast a spell so that people forget that Peter Parker and Spider-Man are one and the same. Unfortunately, he forgets. This movie reminds you at the end of the day that Peter Parker's still a high school student. And he's like, well, wait a minute, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it cracks the multiverse. So now we're seeing him face the Lizard and Electro from the Amazing Spider-Man universe. We're seeing Doc Ock and Green Goblin show up from the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire movies. And we get Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire in this movie. And it all makes sense. This movie had a lot to build up for. The stakes were high, and it managed to achieve everything. And still remind you that this is an origin story for Spider-Man. We're getting a second trilogy with Tom Holland. So the fact that this was the culmination of so much stuff, everything managed to fit perfectly and pay off. So not only is this my favorite live-action Spider-Man movie, this is probably my favorite Phase 4 movie. And that's nothing against, well, I don't want to say it's nothing against the other ones, but that's a different story. 2022, we got 3 MCU movies. The first one being Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Alright, so on one end, we've got Sam Raimi directing. Due to creative differences, as well as another movie being in the works, Scott Derrickson dropped out and ended up making The Black Phone for Blumhouse, and they brought in Sam Raimi. Now, for those that are thinking that this movie is going to have the same feel as the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, this has more in common with Evil Dead, which that's not a bad thing. The problem for me, though, was that Doctor Strange, the first movie, is not one of my favorite movies. And to top it off, they built up so much hype, telling everyone, you're going to get Elizabeth Olsen in here. You definitely need to check out WandaVision beforehand. You've got to check out the Doctor Strange episodes of What If. And you really don't. They made such a big deal about this having so much connective tissue to other products in the MCU, and really you don't need that. I did like the shorter runtime. I loved seeing Marvel put their live-action version of the Illuminati on there. It was great seeing Patrick Stewart come back and have like the yellow wheelchair you see from X-Men, the animated series. John Krasinski, a very known comic book fan, got to play a live-action version of Reed Richards. And Anson Mount got a little bit of a redemption with the version of Black Bolt that he plays in here compared to what he got in the Inhumans TV show. But overall, this movie could have been better. I don't know what else to say beyond that. After that, we got Thor, Love, and Thunder. Thor is the first character from the MCU to get his 4th movie. And it definitely builds up on what you get from Ragnarok. It pays off him leaving with the Guardians in Endgame. But overall, this movie could have been better. While Christian Bale did his thing as Gore the God Butcher, they kind of overdid some of the humor. And they had some stuff that kind of is supposed to pay off in the future, and I don't know if it's going to be paying off or not. I don't want to say too much else for those that have not seen this movie, but there's definitely some stuff that could have been done better. And the theatrical finale to Phase 4, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. This is probably my second favorite movie in Phase 4. And this movie had a lot to do. This was the closing to Phase 4. They had to introduce Namor to the MCU, but it also had to pay tribute to Chadwick Boseman, who unfortunately passed away. So you've got to make a sequel to one of the highest grossing comic book movies of all time without the lead actor. And Ryan Coogler had a lot to do in this movie and managed to do it well. Now, this is definitely one of the more standalone-ish movies in Phase 4, given this is supposed to be the multiverse saga. But given everything we got, I think he did a good job. It's a very emotional movie for those that have not seen it, because it does pay off, does pay a lot of tributes to Chadwick Boseman as well as T'Challa. It explains why T'Challa is not going to be there moving forward. And I've got to say, kudos to Angela Bassett, who puts on one hell of a performance in this movie. And that is my complete MCU collection. So, I've only got one more planned video for the MCU, and that is me doing a video explaining why I prefer Endgame to Infinity War. If there's any other videos that anyone would like to see, comment down below and I will try my best to add those to future plans for videos. There's going to be a pinned comment down below where I will have some of my previous MCU videos. I might even make a playlist just to kind of condense it, as well as me kind of agreeing with Pitch Meeting regarding Far From Home and Honest Trailers regarding Avengers Age of Ultron. And that's going to do it for this one. If you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button. You like what you see, leave a thumbs up. Comment down below. What is your favorite MCU movie? What have your thoughts been as each year progresses? Because we are going on 15 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But that's going to do it.